Derek, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you on. Derek is one of the premier image consultants, leadership experts, and emotional intelligence gurus within Kenya. Derek has been doing this for quite a long time. He's been an industry leader for well over a decade and is joining us today to talk about some of his insights regarding his own personal journey, regarding leadership and his own journey as it pertains to helping people really bring out the best in themselves. So, Derek, without further ado, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bram. Glad to be on.
So, just as a starting point here, I'd like to know, within the Bbanga household growing up, what were the conversations that you had? What are the experiences that you had that led you to be the man you are today?
Well, I remember my parents sort of stressing certain things, pointing out certain things, highlighting certain things that have possibly led to me doing what I do today. I did not know that then. It's only on reflection and being asked a question by someone like you that I can reflect on these things. So, for example, I remember one of the things that my father took very seriously was time management. And he had a really nice Rolex watch. I remember that. and he would always tell me that if you want to be seen as somebody who manages their time well, wear a watch. Ergo. Ever since then, I have always worn a watch. Timepieces are certainly an important part of what I wear, how I present myself. But in that, there is that idea of being able to manage the 24 hours that all of us are given, prince or pauper. And a watch is just one of the tools that you can use to manage that time properly. And especially today, where everybody has a smartphone. So it's very interesting and it's sort of prescient, actually, if you look at it, because that advice towards wear a watch has carried me in good stead, certainly today. Here's something else, shoes. All right, now I'm not going to show my shoes, but
Yeah.
I remember being told that your shoes actually show the journey that you are taking, right? Literally. The shoes that you wear signify to other people that perhaps there are things that you take either seriously or maybe not in life. And so again, since then, shoes have been something that I invest in, that I take seriously, and I always judge people fairly or unfairly based on the type of shoes that they're wearing. Now, again, we can have a conversation about what is appropriate for a particular event or an occasion, but to me, that again is part of what you are presenting to the outside world to give them signals about the type of person that you are. People can't judge your personality or who you are, particularly if they meet you for the first time, but you can show them signs of what you have going on inside by what you present on the outside. And then I remember being told that wearing a tie or a jacket or a blazer, if you want money to transfer to your pocket. Now, again, I mean, we're going back 20, 30 years. But to this day, even in an age where casual dressing is the norm, I like to present myself, again, depending on the event, depending on the occasion, depending on what I want my target market to know, either wearing a tie or a blazer. And actually, because so many people are quote unquote dressed a little bit more casually, this sort of makes me stand out, and hopefully in a positive way. So I think those are some of the things, to answer your question directly, Brian, that have shaped me, particularly in terms of what I do and how I present myself to the wider world.
When it comes to shoes, because I hear this a lot and I've never really understood why they carry so much weight. Why is it that of all the elements and pieces that we wear to kind of present ourselves, why is it that shoes carry so much weight?
Well, let's put aside the advice that I got when I was young. I have heard it said that women,
Yeah.
for example, will always look at a man's shoes, to again judge perhaps their character or who knows what. But I think because shoes are one of those items of, say, clothing that maybe people tend to neglect because they feel that people won't be looking down at your shoes or probably looking up at your face or other items of clothing that you're wearing. So perhaps there's a tendency for people, and again, this is a broad generalization, certainly when it comes to men, that people perhaps don't um, take enough care with their shoes. So it's not even about wearing new shoes or expensive shoes. It's about taking care of the shoes that you are wearing, you know. It's about, making sure that at the very least that they're clean, that they're not necessarily worn out. And again, every event and every occasion has items of clothing, including shoes, that are appropriate for that event. But shoes are a marker. People may not visit your home. Let me use this analogy, right? And just because you don't get visitors, or your car, let's use your car, just because you don't, necessarily carry people in your car, that you drive alone, that gives you license to keep your car or indeed your home a total mess. Because that says something about your character or your personality or what you think about the world in general. So similarly, maybe people don't look at shoes all the time, but if you look after them, there is something inherent about that act of making sure that you're wearing appropriate shoes, that you're looking after them, that you take care of them, that you put in shoe horns and that sort of thing, that speaks to how you will then take care of things that are perhaps a little bit more visible to the outside world or the target market. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yeah, definitely makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And I'm curious. So you've spoken about how your dad instilled these values in you when it
Mm.
comes to the way you present yourself, and in your household, these were things that were status quo. The way you present yourself.
Yeah, I would
When you
say not necessarily status quo, but my dad grew up in the colonial British system, you know, very formal, very proper sort of education. Everything sort of had to be done by the book, follow the rules, follow the regulations, and that sort of, if you will, um, British ethos was passed down to me, the firstborn son. If you're going to write a letter, make sure that you address it correctly. If you're going to sit at the table, make sure that you are using your utensils properly. And like I said, particularly when you contrast that with how perhaps today people don't look at those things as necessarily a priority in life, given what I do for a living, I can absolutely say that it makes a difference.
Fair enough. When you eventually went abroad, because for me, part of why I have this podcast is to be able to dive into people's experiences living abroad and navigating some of the challenges that come along with it and being able to stand out and succeed. So you come from a finance background and you study extensively both in Finland and in the US. What are some of the differences that you noticed when it came to presentation, when it came to leadership? Were there any things that um, you discovered that they do differently there when it comes to those things?
Well, let me use the US as the best example since I spent the most time there. That's where I went to university, and that's where I worked, as you have mentioned, for many years in the financial industry. I mean, I can tell you, when it comes to things like I've mentioned, like in terms of time management, I mean, that's something that is is taken very seriously, right? If a meeting is supposed to start at a particular time, you make sure that you're there early. So that's definitely a difference between that and perhaps how, certain events are run in this part of the world, East Africa. Um, I would say also in terms of, um, you know, the ethos of working hard, you know, success given to those not based on nepotism or what family you come from. And, it didn't matter where you came from. I worked in an organization where there were people from all over the world, right? This is Bloomberg. It's an international organization. There were obviously Americans, but there were plenty of international um, people working there. And success was based not on your background, but based on your hard work, based on your effort, it's based on merit. So that, sort of ethos of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, if you work hard, you put in the hours, then you would be rewarded commensurately, whether in terms of career progression or in terms of compensation. So I think that was something that there's certainly and again, I'm using sort of these broad generalizations, but certainly that was what was instilled in me when I spent time working in countries like the US.
I know this might be a very long time back, but do you remember? Do you remember your interview at Bloomberg? Could you maybe tell us the story of either sitting in the office or wherever it was and having that interview?
Do I remember my interview at Bloomberg? Oh my goodness. I have to dig into the recesses of my mind
Can
to
imagine.
recall how that interview went. This is what I remember.
Hmm.
I remember interviewing for several finance jobs. I distinctly remember there was a large company on Wall Street. I forget the name that I interviewed for. And it was I think it was more of a back office job. And then I did the Bloomberg interview. And I think if I recall, it was face-to-face interview. And there was also an interview on the phone back in the day. There were no video interviews. But I remember why I took the job is because, and I was offered both jobs, and I took the Bloomberg job because it was client facing. So it was not back office. Both jobs are in finance, but this was client facing. Also, the job entailed I think it was like a month of sort of going to almost like a boot camp uh, in terms of learning how things work in the world of finance and Wall Street. So we were actually sent to another town in New Jersey because I was hired with some other people, and we spent a month literally in I recall, sort of like a hotel where we would come to classes every day and sort of be trained on certain aspects of the financial industry. So I thought that was also pretty interesting. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I decided to take that job instead of the other one. Yeah. It's a good question, Brad. I
Were you
haven't thought about that in
yeah,
quite a while.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I can imagine. What was this? Was this the 90s or the 80s, or when was this?
So this is the 90s. Yeah. This is a
The
long
90s.
time ago.
Long time. Were you the only Kenyan at the time? In
Yes.
that group?
Yes.
Okay.
I was the only Kenyan, for sure.
And how have you been able to because a lot of the people that I know are they're the only Indian, they're the only Kenyan, they're the only person of their background in a foreign setting like the US or Finland. Um, what are some of the things that really helped you navigate having still retaining confidence while being in an environment where people are, I guess, from a different nationality or a different country?
Well, being from a different country or being a different nationality actually was one of the things that made me stand out. Because again, how I'd been brought up to sort of err on the side of conservative behavior, conservative look, conservative dress, how I presented myself, how I spoke, and it made me stand out. It made people take a second look at me. In fact, I remember when I joined the university in America, all the international students take two exams. One was to gauge, you'd obviously been accepted in the university because you passed your SATs. I'd done that. But once you joined the university, that first day, all the international students had to take an exam to test their English and an exam to test their math. And part of the English exam included writing an essay. And I distinctly remember the professor coming back after I'd handed in my English essay, and he came back to me to hand it back to me and tell me, how I'd scored. And he asked me if I was a writer.
Mm.
And I'm just a 18, 19-year-old kid who wrote an essay in the English, and I'd written that essay many times in high school here in Kenya. But my English was so good, and the way I wrote, my written English, and I guess also the creative side of whatever story I wrote in that essay, he literally thought that I was a writer. He's like, "You're a writer? This is amazing." Yeah. So I'm meandering a little bit. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think to answer your question, those are the sorts of things that made me stand out the way. And actually, when I was working in the financial industry, Bloomberg, one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing today is because I was sort of picked to do presentations, to do trainings. The company I was working for, Bloomberg, offers financial support to large financial organizations and presented analytics so that people like traders could work on them. And I would very often talk to these, traders and people in finance about the Bloomberg system, and I was picked to do that. Yeah, because of how I
Amazing.
presented myself, how I expressed myself, how I spoke. Yeah.
Amazing. So, because of those foundational elements, you're able to really succeed and really put yourself out there and stand out. This was in the US. What about Helsinki? When you got on the plane and left for Finland, um, do you remember the day that you flew over? Do you remember what the experience of being in a classroom in Finland was like?
I do. I remember the plane flying into Finland. And as I remember, I think I flew Nairobi to Paris, to France. And then I took a plane from Paris to Helsinki. And the plane from Paris to Helsinki was empty. I remember we were like 2 or 3 people on this plane. And I'm like, what is going on here, right? Helsinki was a lot different in terms of culture, weather, how just the country presented itself. Obviously, the main language there was not English. Not everybody spoke English. So those are some of the things that I remember grappling with. Even though I went to a university where classes were in English, Helsinki School of Economics, but it was certainly a little different in terms of the experience I'd had after living for many years in the US.
Is there any particular moment that comes to mind when you think back to your experience being in Helsinki? Is there any particular one that stands out?
look, I'm going to say something, and if there are any Finns or, or people related to Finns or anybody who is Finnish affiliated, I'm just going to say this because this was my experience. In America, people would maybe hear my accent, obviously tell that I wasn't from the States, and they might ask me, where are you from? In Finland, the question might have been couched this way. Rather than where are you from, what are you doing here? Now, not to say that Finnish people were not open, were not welcoming. Certainly, I spent most of my time at the university with university friends, with plenty of international students. But occasionally, because Finland, relative to the US, and I gave the analogy of the plane, being a little bit empty, was perhaps a little bit more isolated. And so people may not have been used to seeing someone from another country land on their shores. And that was it. But otherwise, I think my experiences in Finland, for the most part, were positive.
I can definitely identify with that experience being here in
Yeah.
Germany. I don't think it's necessarily even coming from a
Yes.
point of like ill will. I think it's just, when you're in a place like Germany, for example, where the language is not English, and you're maybe in a smaller town. For example, I was in Bremen. Bremen is northwest of Germany. It's not even the capital city, and it's just not very common to see darker skin faces in those contexts. So I can definitely identify with just being in the space and having people wonder, how exactly are you here?
Yeah, precisely. You can absolutely relate it to that. So there's more curiosity. There was never any malevolence. It was just more of a curiosity. What are you doing here? Why would you pick Finland of all the countries to come and live in or to go to school? Those are sort of the conversations that I would have with Finnish people. Also, Finland to me has an interesting history. They've been dominated by the Swedes on one end and the Russians on the other. So I think as a nation, there's also that sort of, the relationship, let's just say, with people who are not Finnish. Yeah.
True. So you were in the US and then Finland, and then eventually you decided to come back to Kenya.
Yeah.
After being away for so long. What inspired the decision to come back? Because I know a lot of people, Kenyans especially, but I know people from other countries will go to the US, will go to Europe, and then I think most people will have this desire to come back home and either, enact some sort of impact or just be back home and amongst your own people. For you, what inspired the decision to eventually come back?
Yes. So, I also lived in France. I lived in the UK. So I lived in a couple more different countries. And I think the desire to come back just was I had sort of seen it all and done it all abroad. I'd always wanted to do that. Even initially when I went, I think the plan was never for me to, certainly in my mind, was to live abroad forever. I had always wanted to come back. So when the opportunity presented itself for me to come back and use what I had learned and bring it back to Kenya, that was an easy decision for me to make.
And when you decided to come back, because you'd spent so much time in finance, where did the switch occur? What was the moment where you decided to go into image consulting?
So I'd already moved from finance when I was living abroad. So I'd switched to communication. So when I was in France, I was working for a financial firm, but I was in their communications department. So I already switched. I'd got my MBA at HSC, Helsinki School of Economics. I moved to work for this private equity firm, and I started working in their communications department. So I already made that switch. So the opportunities that presented themselves here in Kenya were in strategic comms. That's what I was doing. Strategic comms and PR, that sort of thing. The training sort of came later. And that training came about through some experiences that I went through and also meeting certain people who said, this is perhaps opportunity that you want to do, certainly if you want to branch out on your own.
I see. So you'd already made the switch from finance to strategic comms.
Mm-hmm.
You're working in a finance company, but had moved over to communications. What was it that had led to that change?
I think it was just the opportunity that presented itself. Again, back in those days, you may be offered a job, or there were opportunities that you came across, and I made those decisions not only based on what the job was, but for example, that opportunity to move to France was something that I wanted. I wanted to move to France, and that opportunity to work in that country and see another part of Europe. And then that job happened to be working in that particular department. And even when I started working for that private equity firm, I was doing a little bit of finance initially. But then again, just the way I communicated, the way I wrote. So they tapped me and said, hey, we want you to be doing this and to be working in this department or to be heading this particular department. So that's how I came about moving from strictly doing finance to moving into sort of comms, strategic comms and communication.
Let's see. So when you came back to Kenya, you started your own company.
Yes.
Was this
but that was a few years later.
That was a few years later. So initially you came back and you were working in strategic comms.
Yep.
And then eventually you start your own company. Was this always an aspiration that you had, or how did that come to be?
No, that came about through experiences that I had. So this story that I tell, when I came, I landed at the airport, I received poor customer service. The guy who, and when I say landed at the airport, I'm talking about when I finally repatriated. The customs official serving me had stains on his tie, spoke very poorly to me, had red eyes, bad breath, the whole works. And I said to myself, surely for somebody who comes back to the country, and it was symbolic because this was me. Of course, I'd come in and out of the country several times over the course of the number of years, but this one was symbolic because this was me now coming back home. Living and working in Europe and in the US. And that's when the seed was planted in my mind about, are these guys trained? Who does this? Who does their training? And that's when I started, even though I was working in, as I said, in strategic comms, but that idea that seed had been planted in my mind about, maybe you could start working in an organization or start an organization that would help someone like that. And then I also met somebody who was very instrumental. Her name was Diana Mather, and she was doing exactly what I do today, or at least initially started out doing. And so we had that conversation, and boom, that's how we started the organization.
I see. And during that time, how would you describe the quote-unquote personal branding image consulting landscape? At the time, were people already familiar with what that is, and you were coming into a market that already kind of understood it, or was there a lot of education involved? What was the landscape like at that time?
No, absolutely not. There were very few people who were doing that, if any at all. In fact, I remember one of my colleagues saying, really, people will pay for this sort of service? Is it that important? And that same individual, 5 years later, in his organization, brought me in to work with his staff. So he had been fairly dismissive when I started. And 5 years later, he was like, this is not a nice to have, this is a must have. So certainly it was not as, shall I say, as competitive as it is today. Or there weren't as many people doing it as they are today.
I see. And when you're in these meeting rooms, trying to get new clientele and, selling them on the idea of this being a must-have, not just a nice to have, how did you go about pitching that to people and getting clientele?
Well, I think for me, there was a certain element of luck that played with it. I mean, the first contract that we had was working with a major hotel, training all of their staff, a new hotel that was literally being built up from the ground. In fact, that training was conducted while they were still constructing the hotel around us. And we trained all, 200 plus of their staff. So that immediately gave us the confidence. I mean, I'm talking about me and my business partner, confidence that we could do this. It gave us some immediate credibility being associated with that particular brand. So there was certainly an element of luck in terms of that. I mean, we didn't have to work that hard to get that particular contract. Of course, subsequently, we did, of course, had to go in and obviously sell ourselves, help try and convince people to take us on. But we already had that on as part of our marketing, the fact that we had worked with this fairly well-known brand. So that made it easier.
So that made it easier, already having the name brand to kind of help sell things. Fair enough. So in a separate interview, when I was doing research, you mentioned that you have an hour-long training on handshaking. And that made me very curious. When you have, for example, in the case of this clientele where you had this hotel staff that you had to teach, what are the things that you absolutely prioritize as these are must things that need to be part of each training?
So I actually don't do that hour-long training on handshakes anymore because our world has changed. With the advent of COVID, obviously, where, people literally stopped shaking hands. So I've kind of amended that. But prior to that, I would break down the anatomy of a handshake. Everything from how you approach somebody. And obviously, this is done from the point of view of somebody who is either networking or meeting a fellow professional or meeting other professionals. So I'd break everything down, everything from, how, you, for example, I don't know if you can see this, right?
Yeah.
This part of your hand gets up from the grip to how you hold the hand and all of that. So it can actually get pretty intricate in terms of a handshake. And all of that geared, of course, to help sell yourself. And it's part of sort of the body language that we'll talk about when it comes to image. Yes.
Listen. So with clientele, so you've talked about body language briefly, the handshake and the intricacies that go into that. For you, what are the foundational elements, or what are the things that for you are the backbone of making sure that you present yourself well?
I rely heavily on the Arabian principles, which some people will question. I get it. But that's how I base a lot of my trainings, particularly with what I talk about in terms of communication. So if you look at 100, if you were to break down what people respond to, 55% is, say, body language and the visual, so what you wear, everything including, colors and texture of materials and so on and so forth. Certainly body language, there's a lot that goes on there. Micro gestures, nonverbal communication. 38% is tone of voice. So again, how you use your voice, projection, pacing, pitching, all of the things that go into how you use your voice. So example, if you hear how my voice changes. And then the 7%, which is the message that you are sending. And not to say that that's not important, but that is how I sort of break it down, certainly in terms of communication.
In speaking to people, and people who don't really understand the value of what you're teaching. Have you noticed anything in particular when you speak to people, or maybe it's in the midst of training or something like that? Is there anything in particular that you've found really helps people have it click the value of what you're doing?
The foundation of my training is based on an acronym that I use. It's called the KASH formula. So the KASH formula is an acronym where KASH, rather than being spelled with a C, is spelled with a K. So that K is knowledge, right? So this is about taking in this knowledge, common or uncommon, but it's about equipping yourself with, and again, things change. We're now in, obviously, a digital age. We're soon going to be immersed in the age of AI, but it's about equipping yourself with that knowledge, even as that knowledge changes. And then the A is for the attitude. Okay. So how do you approach, for example, learning something new? What is the attitude that you have? Are you open to receiving new information? And do you have an attitude that's just willing to, what is it that the Italian says? It ancora impora, always learning, right? And then the S is for skill. And when I say skill, for me, I'm talking about practice. Okay. It's about how it is better to be good at what you are doing than passionate. Okay. He literally says that skills trump passion. So the old advice is find something that you're passionate about. He makes the case, which I believe, that if you find something that you are good at, then it can lead to passion. But that is easier for you to become more successful. And so for me, skills is about practicing. It is about practicing everything from communication to emotional intelligence to leadership, right, to public speaking, all of the things that I talk about, which then lead to the H so that it becomes a habit, becomes a success work habit. So that is the foundation for how I approach working with my clients, for sure, whether it's one-on-one or working with a team.
I see. So one of the reasons I'm asking the question regarding, how is it that you're able to have it click in people's minds the value of the thing is because let's take, for example, engineering or something in finance where someone is coming in with a hard skill and you can quantifiably see the translation between, okay, we added this one engineer to the team or we built this product. This is how much money that we're able to get back on investing in this product or in this engineer, for example. So when it comes to things like emotional intelligence, leadership, and soft skills in general, even if someone is able to be trained and they're able to perform at their job better, I imagine that it must be difficult to kind of connect the two and connect the training to the ROI. How have you gone about communicating the ROI of soft skills?
So I would agree with you to a certain extent. How do you quantify success when you are talking about soft skills? How do you measure it? But guess what, Brian? There are tools to measure this. There are tools. So for example, there's a fantastic tool that I use in AI that you can measure. And it's just the measuring is done by asking people specific questions. And if you use that behavioral approach, how has somebody's behavior changed since they went through this particular training? How important do you think that type of behavior is? That type of communication is? That type of action is? Then you can you can quantify it. You can put that on a scale, you can measure it, and you can measure it at one point before the training, right after training, 3 months after training, 6 months after working with somebody. So, with your engineering background, that's exactly how we would, measure that ROI and see whether the needle has moved in terms of whether somebody has incorporated those behavioral changes in terms of all of the areas that I've talked about.
I see. So there are tools in place, in fact, that we're
Mm.
able to gauge these things and these behavioral changes. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And you spoken about also pivoting from being more in image consulting to now focusing more on leadership and emotional intelligence. Was there a particular moment in time that influenced that decision, or what led to the pivot to leadership and emotional intelligence?
Maybe not one moment in time, but certainly I was going in that direction as I started working increasingly with C-suite, with people who are in leadership capacities, with people who are in leadership not just in the private sector but in the public sector. So, I didn't necessarily want to say stagnant in terms of what I was able to provide. So again, I was just able to, you know, um, bring in these programs to give my target market additional value to some of the things that I was speaking about initially. And so it was just a natural progression. And now I have a combination of the two. I still do some of the stuff that I used to do when I started initially, but increasingly I'm now being asked to talk about these things, to work with people who are in leadership positions. And certainly EI, the advent of, again, this black swan of an event that changed the way our lives, how we work forevermore. It was people, were going through stress, they were going through burnout, you know, managers needed to have empathy as people were in flux, working from home. And those are the things that I speak to directly, particularly when I run my emotional intelligence courses or programs.
I see. Well, I'm curious about. So you've spoken about working at C-suite leadership. In your experience working with C-suite leadership, is there anything that you have noticed that they struggle with in particular that was really sorely needed that you identified?
Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody is different, but to answer your question, perhaps I would say, when I say everybody, I mean every client that I work with has different challenges that they face, again, depending on the organization. But I would say the things that are common to most people all fall in that rather large realm of communication, of, maybe changing a leadership style to one of, say, leading with emotional intelligence, leading with empathy, and a change from that sort of it's my way or the highway to creating psychological safety for our team. Those are the sorts of changes that I certainly encourage. And one that I would say that a lot of leaders that I have worked with have I have encouraged to incorporate in terms of their leadership style.
I see. So
Also, you'd be
moving
surprised.
with
A lot of people come
yeah,
to me for public speaking. And for
public
example,
speaking.
I say public speaking is one of the number one soft skills that you should have as a leader. The ability to speak to 200, or 2,000 people. And even the skills in public speaking, which you would imagine would be to a room full of people, are skills that you can use in one-on-one conversation or negotiation or networking.
Yeah. You bring up public speaking. I don't know if you know this, but the world's number one fear is actually public speaking, which is very interesting. When you think about public speaking, and to me, one of the first words that comes to mind is charisma. Do you what do you think about when you think when it comes to charisma? How can someone enhance their charisma when it comes to public speaking? What are some of the first things that someone can do in order to get better at it?
So not every public speaker or everyone who speaks in public. So again, speaking in public and public speaker. So there may be a public speaker, could be somebody who even maybe does this for a living, right? But speaking in public, even for somebody who's not a public speaker, at some point in time, you're going to have to speak to a room that has 2 or more people. Certainly if you want to get ahead in the professional world. And when it comes to charisma, that isn't something that you necessarily have to have. It is great to have that, and you can use that as part of your toolbox or arsenal when you are speaking to people. But some of the most effective speakers in public that I have seen, the Robin Sharmas of this world, yes, he has some charisma, but he's not necessarily the type of speaker who is over the top in terms of how they present themselves, in contrast to, say, somebody like a Tony Robbins, right? But you can use whatever you have, all right? Even if you're a little bit more soft-spoken. So for me, charisma, I think, is part of just if you have a confidence when you get up to speak, to present some information, to persuade somebody to your way, to present a message, to make a pitch, whatever the circumstances have. That confidence, which is brought on by a variety of things, can be considered, in my mind, charismatic, right? That message is able, if you're able to get that message across using humor, using stories, then I would say in my mind that you possess a certain amount of charisma. I say there are always 3 E's. Anytime you're getting up, doing a podcast like this, or you are speaking. Number 1, I want to see somebody who brings a certain level of effort. Now, that effort could be in terms of, say, body language, all right? If you notice, I am standing, okay? I'm standing because, to me, when I stand, my diaphragm is lengthened, my voice is stronger, I present myself in a little bit more dynamic fashion. So that's number 1. Bring a little bit of effort. Number 2 is energy. And again, energy, you can see that I'm expending. You can look at my body language. I'm using my hands. I'm not necessarily ranting or raving or shouting, but there's a certain energy, even my voice modulation, that I'm bringing to this conversation. And then the third is enjoyment. So whereas I don't necessarily smile all the time, there's a certain enjoyment because these are topics that I enjoy speaking about, and you can hear that in my tone of voice. You can see it occasionally in my nonverbal communication. So those 3 E's, I think, anytime that you are communicating, I think are important as part of your toolkit, if you will.
I don't know how to what extent you'll be able to answer this question. I hope we'll be able to get a story out of this. But is there any particular client that you've worked with when it came to either public speaking or personal image that you're really proud of because of how much progress they were able to make?
So let me get this, Brian. You want me to,
you don't have to divulge
to
any
break
names, but
the confidentiality, the client confidentiality, and mention their name on this podcast that is going out to hundreds of people?
So as I was saying, we don't have to include any names, but it would be interesting to hear about if you'd be comfortable answering that question.
Absolutely. I mean, the answer is yes. I meet people that I worked with. Remember that hotel I told you that we worked with? My first client, literally, I'm not even kidding you. I am not making this up. I met one of the people who used to work in that hotel, working at a different hotel. I met him last week.
Mm.
He recognized me. I looked at him. He looked kind of familiar. I hadn't seen this guy in, 9 or 10 years, however long it was that I started working with him. But he remembered me. He came straight over to me. He greeted me. He said, "Thank you. I remember we worked with you when we were at that hotel and we were building up, and I took what you said. And here he was, now a manager at this new establishment." And that's just one example of many people over the course of my career that I have hopefully helped. But I certainly have plenty of testimonials like that.
I see. Well, when you have someone walk up to you and you don't even necessarily remember the face, but they come to you and they give you such a testimony of how you've impacted their lives. Is that something that really reinforces to you the power of what you're doing?
No, I'm perpetually embarrassed when somebody says that to me. I'm just kidding. Of course, there's some kind of validation that what I'm doing, that I'm doing the right thing. That's my mark on the world. Part of why I do what I do is because this is the legacy that I want to leave, right? So,
Yeah.
Sure. It just validates, like I said, the work that I'm doing. Yeah. Feels good.
When you're speaking about some of the books that you've read, for example, you spoke about passion, doing something you're passionate about versus doing something that you're good at. Before we move on from leadership and personal branding, what are some books over the past decades that have been the most influential for you that you'd highly recommend for people to go read?
Oh man, where do I start, Brian? So maybe unlike a lot of people, the books that I have over there, I actually read. Okay. So I have a lot of biographies. I have Gordon Ramsay. I have
Gordon Ramsay, interesting.
Yeah, I have Gordon Ramsay's biography. It's pretty interesting over there. I have books on leadership, books by Dale Carnegie, Stand and Deliver. And, for me, it's a cliche, but oldies, but goodies. A lot of sort of the Dale Carnegie books, Seven Habits of Highly Successful People, Steve Covey's. Those are sort of the books that, to me, I read maybe once a year. And there's something about the foundational knowledge and information that they give that remains relevant, even though, some of these books are written 30, 40, 50 years ago.
So you've mentioned the Gordon Ramsay book, Dale Carnegie.
Well, that's just an example of. I love reading. Listen. The book, the Blueprint to Success, has been. The Blueprint to Success has been written many times over by successful people throughout the generations. There is nobody who can come today and say, "Aha, I have something new." Everything has already been, to my mind, either written or discovered, or people have talked about it. Now, what we do is we take that and we may put a little bit of our twist on it, but it's there, it's written down, it's immortalized. So reading a book about Jomo Kenyatta or Mahatma Gandhi or Gordon Ramsay, successful people, you take what they did and you just replicate it in your life. Everything from the Greek philosophers to not everything that is written out there is necessarily fit for consumption, right? All right. These days, any celebrity can get a ghostwriter, put a book out there. So you've also got to be a little bit judicious, a little bit judgmental in terms of some of this information that you're taking in.
for sure.
But there's some fantastic
If you
books
had
that have been written by successful people. Yes, go ahead.
yes, if you had to pick out 3 or 5 to recommend, let's say 3, what would be your top recommendation?
So I think I mentioned them. So definitely the Steve Covey book for sure.
Okay.
7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And I really think that book on communication by Dale Carnegie, Stand and Deliver. Love that book. I have that book highlighted all the way through because every other line is virtually a nugget. And biography, I would say Winston Churchill. And there have been many biographies written about him. But in terms of leadership and how to behave during times of crisis or when there's a challenge, I think there's a lot that you can take from reading a biography or reading about Winston Churchill's life that can help.
Okay. Perfect. So Winston Churchill when it comes to leadership.
Yes.
Okay. That's definitely one I haven't read yet. I think I'll definitely take that on. I'm also curious about another dimension of your personal brand, which has been fitness and staying in shape. You particularly are someone who is working as a white collar professional. How are you also able to stay on top of being in shape?
So if I heard you correctly, Brian, you're asking me about my health and fitness journey. Was that the question? Did I hear you correctly? Yes. Okay. So that's become an important, really important part of my life. I was always into, athletics and sports in school. I may have tapered up a little bit as I went into college and started working, but you can believe me, over the last 10 to 15 years, that has become so important. I believe your physicality drives your mentality. And for me, the holy grail of exercise, nutrition and diet, and I'm going to actually put in mental health, are so important, As these hairs get grayer, it's even more important. Start my day with some form of mindfulness or meditation, physical activity to keep me in the best shape of which actually I believe I am in. And then watching what I consume, what I eat, and or what I drink. So important. And believe me, if I had I wish I had started this like way back when I was in college. When I was in college, I don't know. But again, the folly of youth. You believe yourself to be, what's the word? That you are going to be on this earth forever. And, you can bounce back from whatever multitude of sins that you indulge in. Those consequences, the consequences of that will play on later in life. So that's the one of the regrets that perhaps I have. And I don't know if regret is the right word, but I wish I'd started this journey earlier. But now, so important. Yeah.
So one of the things people tend to struggle with when it comes to working, their job, but also making time for fitness and being consistent with it. I think some of the biggest issues I've heard and also experienced myself are, I guess, energy level. That's one. And also being able to fit it into your schedule. I think time and energy probably are the 2 biggest things. How have you been able to navigate those things in order to remain consistent?
So let me amend something I said earlier. I mentioned mental health. Mental health is important, but let me put that in a category by itself. The 3 things are exercise, obviously nutrition, food and diet, sleep. That's what I should have said. And that is how I'm answering this question. Sleep is the bedrock of everything. When people say they don't have time or they don't have energy, I can guarantee you that can all be traced back to sleep or lack thereof. And when I'm talking about sleep, I'm talking about quality sleep. I've worked on my sleep for the last 4 or 5 years. I can safely say I have immaculate sleep. And that is able to help me manage my day so that I have the energy, the time to take care of, like I've said, the exercise or the diet and things like that. Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've learned and implemented to help you have immaculate sleep?
I mean, where do I start? For example, making sure that the quality of what you are sleeping on, from the mattress to the pillows. Okay. And again, we're not talking about, breaking the bank here, but a lot of people really don't care what they sleep on, right? So making sure that you're buying what's the best quality or what's most appropriate for you to get quality sleep. Making sure that you sleep with the right temperature in the room. Most people sleep in a room that is way too warm. Okay? So again, that affects the quality of your sleep. Making sure that you actually find time for that sleep. Okay? So, and again, this is a conversation that we can have. Night owl versus an early bird, right? But, being able to actually go to sleep at a time that enables you to get, the 6 or 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Again, people can have a couple of differences on that. And then prioritizing it, right? Versus prioritizing, say, other activities. Okay? Based on your natural body clock. So those are some of the things that I would say that people should start looking at and examining.
I see.
Yeah.
So
and now that let me just add, now that everybody has a smartphone, you can actually track the quality of your sleep. So put that phone to good use. Okay, although again I say, don't sleep with your phone next to your bed, that sort of thing. But you can certainly begin to track the quality of your sleep, and whether you track the quality of using your device. Yeah.
I see. So sleep for you, when it comes to your fitness journey and also just being mentally healthy, sleep is a bedrock of it.
That's where it starts. Let me tell you. When I
where it
have a
starts.
good night's sleep, and I sleep immaculately, once in a while, I'll have a rough night's sleep for whatever reason, and my day is destroyed. But thank God, since 99% of the time, I sleep really well. I wake up and I have the energy to certainly fit in, whether it's exercise and some of these other things that help me be more productive throughout the day.
At any point during your fitness journey, did you ever rely on a fitness trainer?
Sorry, Brian, there's a plane passing outside. You said, did I ever rely on a?
At any point during your fitness journey, because in your case, you've mentioned that you always had a background in sports and being very active. At any point during your fitness journey, have you ever enlisted the services of a fitness trainer to help you with your fitness?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I have. Listen, having a coach, somebody who can help you, somebody who can point you in the right direction, I think is important, whether you're on a fitness journey or you're on a leadership journey. Okay? I have absolutely had somebody, a fitness trainer or a fitness coach, to help me on my journey towards being the physical specimen that I am today. No, just to help me be the best physical version that I am, that I can be today. So for sure, yes, I have. I don't have one now, but I've certainly had one in the past.
And what value were they able to provide with your fitness journey?
Oh, they were able to design programs for me, design nutrition programs for me, make sure I'm on the right track, motivate me, connect me to like-minded people. There were a plethora of reasons why there were only upsides to working with a personal trainer for me.
I see. So, okay, motivation, being able to design programs,
Yep.
and so on. Okay. Um, is there any other key advice that you'd give for people who are juggling, working with being able to also ensure that they stay in best shape? Is there anything that we haven't covered?
When I know, Brian, when you're saying that people don't have the time, but I would venture to say in a lot of these cases, people don't have the time because again, I'm going to take it back to the sleep. So the sleep cycle takes you up to a certain point. Now, again, whether you wake up at 5 or you wake up at 6 or 7 or whatever time you wake up as a busy professional, right? You wake up and then you go to work. But what if you were able to create an hour in the morning for you to do some exercise? Okay. Now, if you work your way backwards, that would mean perhaps sleeping an hour early. Okay. So to me, everything is predicated on being able to manage your sleeping patterns in order for you to create time to answer the specific question for you to fit in exercise. And that's just an example. I'm not saying that you have to work out in the morning. Although I think a lot of studies show that that's sort of where there's the most upside to say working out in the mornings. People are busy. And again, some people are also under the illusion that you have to do exercise, say, every day. Certainly not the case. You can, again, be very focused, and maybe this is where a fitness coach or a fitness trainer works. If you're very focused and you go in and you have a productive workout, that beats having to go, say, to do this on a daily basis. If you get, and again, we can discuss whether it's 2, 3, 4 times a week, rather than having to do this every day. And again, if you're trying to do this around your busy work life or busy family life.
No, fair enough. I think for me personally, what I noticed coming out of university where I was able to train and I more or less had a very free schedule was actually it's the energy component for me that I found to be the difficult part when it came to remaining consistent. So, people say they don't have the time, and I definitely understand. Maybe in the case of people with kids or a busy job that requires maybe 60 hours plus, that may be the case. But for me personally, I've definitely found that I think it's definitely energy that is an issue for a lot of people in my experience as well.
Sure, I get that. I mean, there are days I wake up and so I work out very early in the morning. All right.
Yeah.
I'm a 4:30, 5 o'clock kind of gym kind of guy, right? But I'm lucky. I can go to a gym that is open that early. And there are certainly days where the inclement weather, and you're like, are you kidding? I'm not going to go out in this weather. But you kind of try to also push yourself it. Again, part of this is a mental game. There are things you can do, sleep in your gym clothes, little hacks, if you will, that you can do, particularly if you're a person who struggles with getting that type of energy. There's certain supplements that you can take, for example, that can help get you that energy. So, there are various things that you can do, and it's obviously an individual basis in order for you to get the energy. But you know what? Once you start working out, believe you me, that energy will naturally come. That's definitely one of the byproducts of physical activity.
Okay. Yeah, definitely very poignant advice.
Mm-hmm.
Last subject I would like to ask you about is the acting. How did your acting journey begin?
So again, this is something that started when I was yay high. Can't see where my hand is. Right? I mean, I discovered at a very early age that I could stand up on a stage and perform, and people would react to that performance. And I was actually put into those situations. So whether it was taking part in plays or taking about performances from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. So the bug, I was bitten very early. Now, life happens, and that's not necessarily the career path that I decided to take. But I was still infected with that fever. And so when the opportunity came for me to be able to fit this in to what I do for a living, and in this case, it was being able to do this on TV, then I took that opportunity. And part of that was just being able to look at my life, look at my day, look at how I planned my day, and look at how my day was planned, and be able to fit this around that. And it's been very rewarding. And there are lots of crossover between when I am acting on a TV show to when I am working with one of my clients. So I'm able to use the same skills in both cases. And I think even during that long period in my life when I wasn't doing it, I think subconsciously I was always looking for an opportunity to be able to get back into whether I was doing plays. So I did actually a lot of theater when I was younger. Now I'm focused more on doing, TV shows. Yeah.
I see. What was the first TV role that you got? So you told us that you've really had this for quite a while.
Yeah.
What was the first TV role, and do you remember your first time being the first episode of you being on set?
So I'm going to discount any reality TV shows that I may have, let's just say, accidentally found myself on. That is something that you're either going to have to research, or somebody who has crack research skills can find out. But I think the first intentional TV show that I was on was a show called Changes, which was about 2013, 2014.
KTN?
Changes. No, it was on DSTV. They may have showed it on KTN later, but it was a DSTV Mnet sort of production. Yeah.
I see. And so this is your first TV role, discounting the reality TV.
It's not my first performance because I've done plenty of theater, but it was my first TV role. Yes.
I see. And so I'm interested in finding out what was it like being on TV acting in Changes. Is there anything memorable that you still look back on and fondly remember?
It was interesting. I mean, it was my first time, so getting to grips with that particular world, dealing with crew, production, getting to set on time. You don't forget, I'm doing this, and at the same time, I have my other career. So being able to, again, bring those skills when I talk to my clients about time management, I literally had to be able to manage that time. So that was very interesting. And, I've sort of gotten better at that. And just how it is being on a set and dealing with, actually, like emotional intelligence. I mean, you're dealing with people who are, all these different personalities, and, people you need a lot of self-awareness. You need a lot of self-management, for sure. Empathy, all of those skills are needed. So yeah, those are some of the things that I remember certainly from that show, and I've replicated even on different sets that I've been on.
When you look at your current performances now versus back then during Changes, how do you think you've evolved as an actor?
Brian, I don't look at my performances.
You don't?
No.
That's
sometimes
very interesting. Sometimes.
I don't. Listen, I'm one of those people. I do it. I get the job done. occasionally I might watch something, you know. It's interesting because as much as I do TV, I don't watch a lot of TV. I really don't. So, so, so I don't necessarily watch everything that I do. But you see, the clips on YouTube, certain episodes that you watch that were interesting to see how they are. So yeah, that's that's what I do. So in terms of comparing performances, listen, every day is different. Sometimes you deliver something great and you're like, wow, I really delivered. And there's some you're like, I wish I could have done a better job. So it's mixed reviews, I would say, sometimes.
I see. Fair enough. Okay. Derek, I think that's all for today.
All right. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for being an absolutely incredible guest. I had so much fun in this episode.
Thank you, Brian. This was great. You asked certainly a lot of questions that I haven't been asked before. So that was good. You made me think about certain parts of my life that I have not thought about. So this is all good. And I can't wait for this podcast, for this episode to come out. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thanks.